You know, as we were coming into the show, our producer, Matt, was giving us some instructions. He always gives the guests, like, Rob will introduce you and bring you in. And at the end of this one, he was telling our guest, Cecile Wehrman, she's the executive director of the North Dakota Newspaper Association. Matt says, Rob will introduce the show, and then he'll bring you in, hopefully, which I guess is a jab at me for sometimes going off on diatribes and forgetting my guests, my co-host. Admittedly, it happens, but I take a little umbrage at that, Matt.
I thought it was well constructed the way that Matt delivered that blow.
All right.
Right before hitting record. I loved it.
Yeah,
it was perfect.
Right before hitting record, punches me right in the ego, and then hits record.
Well, here's the deal. When you're punching around Rob Port, it's hard not to hit some ego.
Wow. Okay. Well, just slamming me left.
Welcome back.
Welcome to Plain Talk. We are going to be talking about newspapers. As I mentioned, our guest is Cecile Wehrman. She's the executive director of the North Dakota Newspaper Association. She's also president of Journal Publishing, publisher of the Journal in Crosby and the Tioga Tribune, which I am a subscriber to both. And we're going to talk about the newspaper industry, which whenever everybody talks about the newspaper industry, it's always in the context of the newspaper industry is dying, which I think is unfortunate because it's not dying, it's changing. People still want news. And that's actually the topic of a survey that the North Dakota News Cooperative recently published. The survey was conducted. It was funded by a grant from the Bush Foundation, surveyed 31 newspaper executives, 53 editors, as well as almost 400 adults across the state about news. What they found is that most people, 53%, said the importance of their local newspaper is very important. 53%. Those just saying important was another 36%. You're talking about 89% of people saying that their local newspaper is important. Now, Cecily, that's certainly a nice result. I mean, for those of us who work in the newspaper industry, do I need to do full disclosure here and point out that my paycheck comes from the newspaper industry? It does. Obviously, I work for a foreign communications company, so I have an interest in this stuff. But one thing that worried me a little bit about this survey is that sometimes people tell pollsters things that they like to think about themselves that aren't actually how they. I like to tell my doctor that I eat a lot of vegetables. This is not true. I like to think that about myself, that I eat healthy. I don't. I think people should support the local newspaper and should support local news. And I think a lot of people like to think that about themselves. I'm a little worried that their actions sometimes don't carry that out.
Right. Well, I will tell you that one thing that was really neat about the public portion of this survey is that they did not qualify these people as newspaper readers before they launched into the survey. And the people who participated did not know that the purpose of the survey was to gather information about newspapers until obviously they started asking questions about that.
Good to know.
So it was designed to be a cross-section, demographically weighted across the state, rural versus urban, to get just a general public reaction. So if they were trying to say what the survey taker wanted to hear, they were really thinking fast because this was not something they had time to contemplate.
Cecile, one of the things in the survey that I think was good is it indicated that people are willing to pay more to keep their local newspaper afloat or going, which is, again, a nice thing to say. But how do you get them to actually do that, right? I mean, I think one of the experts that was in the article from the news co-op was, people will buy a soda and a candy bar and not think anything about it, but then they'll look at their newspaper, which is half the price, and be like, well, I'm not going to buy that newspaper. So how do you get people to not only just say they value it, but actually pay for that?
Well, there's a couple of different things, and this is among the initiatives we'll probably be expanding on. We have had one newspaper group in North Dakota recently do some work with the lady whose statistics that you just mentioned, where those statistics originally came from, was Terry Finneman, who's a North Dakota native and a professor at a university in Kansas. And she has a program that she brings out to newspapers that she's been piloting in many states, where they go through a whole process changing the value proposition and how people view newspapers and gain understanding about the costs and the inputs that go into it. And that one newspaper group that did that was able to substantially raise their subscription prices with very minimal loss of subscribers once people understood that. And so, for one thing, we have to be a lot better at valuing what we do, and we need to be a lot better about promoting what we do. And so that's why one of the initiatives that's just started in the last couple of months is called Read Local through NDNA. And what I'm doing is trying to travel the state and talk with civic groups, schools, any kind of organization that's interested in promoting newspapers or having newspapers survive in their community, to try to understand that we need to pay attention to local news, not just all of the things that are bombarding us all day long on social media and through our phones. Newspapers are in the digital space too, and even our name sometimes is a detriment because people think about print and people want both print and digital. And we have both print and digital.
Yeah. Although the people who want print is a shrinking demographic.
I will challenge you on that, Rob. We have research that shows that every decade of life, from the 18-year-olds to the over 65s, when we ask them what their preference is, it is evenly weighted at every decade of life between those who prefer print and those who prefer digital. So that's one of the um, misnomers that we need to blow up, is the idea that only young people want digital and only old people want print, because it's
Yeah.
actually just a preference.
Yeah, I don't know. And maybe that's my bias sneaking in. I don't understand the ongoing demand for a print product at all. But whatever. To different strokes, different folks. The market will sort that out. One thing I think is really difficult is we are competing, and I think what you said about reminding people of the value of this is really important for a couple of reasons. One, people are getting subscription fatigue. Chad and I are baseball fans, and it seems like it's getting to the point where we have to subscribe to a half a dozen services to watch our team throughout the year. We're just being asked, and then the subscription, Netflix is going up, HBO's going up, all the different streaming services that I subscribe to. So my kids and my family, we can watch all the shows we want. We have to cut through that and point out, this is valuable. This is one of the ones you need to keep.
Right. And people feel like they're ingesting news all the time because they're on their screen and they're being fed all of this information from different sources, but we're just asking them to prioritize this trusted, what they identify as a trusted source, and support it with a subscription, because without that support, we're not going to survive. So,
And I
try
think
to help people understand the difference of the value and the type of information and the source.
I think we could do a really good job of that in terms of we're doing a good job of covering the local sports teams that you care about, the local community events that you care about. I think where it gets harder and where we're competing with is that the sort of work, like work that's trustworthy, is usually complicated. It's not sensational. And sometimes it's sensational. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes the truth is very sensational, but a lot of times it's not the neat little soundbite that some Twitter influencer can push out where they've glommed on to one little thing and then they're blowing that up. What we do is a lot more complicated. And I think it's a lot harder because it's not as clear cut. It's not what we're offering you is not going to fit in to your biases as neatly as you might like. That's what we're up against. We're up against people. We're doing journalism that is sometimes going to report things that you don't like, versus I'm an influencer. I have a target audience and I'm only ever going to tell them what they want to hear. That's really hard for us. I don't know. I really struggle with how we overcome that.
Yeah. I mean, it's been being talked about right now about, the dopamine hit that people get when they're constantly being fed things that already reinforce views that they already have and that excitement level. But I think it's education, and it's also just basic civics and reading in schools. Our school children, a lot of them are learning everything on a tablet. So even at school, even though we're trying to get away from phones in schools, they're still on screens all day long. And while they're not being bombarded with websites, they're learning in a different way. And so that's one reason why one of our initiatives, called Kid Scoop News, that just expanded into the eastern part of the state, is so important to give kids printed matter that they can handle and interact with, do activities with, and be exposed to a print product. Their teachers have told us it's the only printed matter some of them have in the classroom, which is just amazing for those of us who grew up with books.
So, Cecile, I think one of the issues that, when we're talking about online and digital content and getting subscriptions to your local papers and all that kind of thing, I think one of the issues is newspapers gave us that stuff for free for a long, long time. I mean, the idea of me having to subscribe to the Forum, which I do, now it's much. What's
better.
that?
You'd better, my friend.
Yeah, I do. But for a long time, I could just click on any Inform link and read this stuff online. So even before we came on today, we were talking about how the audiences for this podcast are different than Rob's column because of the paywall. And I don't know how many times you guys hear it, but I didn't read that because it's behind a paywall, and people are like mad at the newspaper for having a paywall.
My favorite is when they tell me about all the fun ways they've come up with to get around our paywall too.
Yes.
Thanks
Yeah,
for stealing from my livelihood. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a high compliment when somebody screenshots a story out of the journal and shares it with everyone.
Yeah. So how do you get around that? I mean, it is like people like their local news, but if they can figure out a way to get it for free, man, it seems like they're willing to do that. And we were trained at the beginning of social media and all that everything was free. And so to get around that just seems really difficult, especially with all the whining about paywalls here.
Yeah, it's education. I mean, we have to tell the story, not that newspapers are dying, but that newspapers are an integral part of your community. And if you don't support your local newspaper, you're losing the engine that helps drive your local economy, because it's a place to advertise, it's a place to get information. And, we're also having to educate about the fact that this advertising revenue model that has supported newspapers for 200 years is no longer working for us. So, there's all kinds of exploration about nonprofits, memberships, those kinds of things. But the most important thing that we are trying to do right now is educate people about what could be lost if the newspapers are not supported.
I don't know that people appreciate that. And again, this is coming from someone employed by the newspaper industry, so maybe people are going to listen to this and roll their eyes. But I think if a community doesn't have a strong, active newspaper, or news source that is responsible and ethical, that does good, aggressive reporting, responsible reporting, and has a strong editorial voice, that community is hurt by that when it lacks that. Now, I would argue, and maybe Cecily probably doesn't want to, I argue I live in a community like that, where we don't have a very strong newspaper, that does not have a very strong editorial voice. Mm-hmm. And I can look at the ways that our community is hurt by that at times. Things that get overlooked, or the taxpayers or the voters get blindsided by something that should have been reported, but all of a sudden it's happening to them and they didn't know about it. And in a lot of ways, it's not their fault. They should have had somebody reporting that to them. A news story, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a newspaper. I mean, I'm medium agnostic. I want, good journalism can happen in a lot of different mediums. It doesn't have to be a newspaper, but it does have to be there. Like it becomes a voice of the community. Imagine Fargo without the Forum. It's hard to think about it, because that community needs an outlet like the Forum talking for them. Now, again, that's me being self-serving, but
right.
It's not really difficult.
It's not being self-serving, Rob, because if you look around North Dakota and the 72 newspapers that we have, only 10 of them are in population centers. Okay, so that means we have 62 communities in North Dakota where the newspaper is the only local news source. They don't have a radio station. The nearby TV station is not covering them maybe once a year. So what's lost is that oversight of local government, city council, county commission, and school board.
But also, even beyond government and politics, I would argue cohesion in the community. Like, where do you go if you're putting on a bake sale or a street dance or something, and you want to I guess Facebook, but I mean, the social media wilds are very, very difficult. It's really hard. I mean, if the newspaper disappears, then you're stuck getting your news from randos on Facebook, and that's not a good way to do it.
Exactly. And I do want to share a couple of things before I forget. One is that this surveying that we're doing, I want to make sure to give credit to our partners. And actually, the grant recipient is the Rural Development Finance Corporation. And another partner is the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives. And they're interested in this issue of preventing news deserts because their customer base is rural America. So that's why they're involved. And also when you were speaking to, a town that doesn't have a newspaper, um, sadly, the Tioga Tribune is no longer open. And I wanted to correct that, and I'm sorry we didn't talk about that beforehand, but we had to close that paper down in September 2 years ago, not because it wasn't making its way, not because it wasn't financially stable, but because we couldn't find a reporter. We advertised for months to try to find a reporter to come into that community, advertised locally, offered training, and we couldn't find anybody who was willing to take on that role. And me being at the Newspaper Association, I was no longer able to fill in that gap as I had in past times. So that's yet another issue, is having how valuable it is that our newspapers are attracting journalistic talent from outside of the state, kids who have gone to college in other states, and bringing them into these communities to learn their craft and serve those communities. And that's getting harder to do too.
So I want to, you'd mentioned something about the business model and how the traditional advertising pays for a newspaper to employ the people they need to do. And that's broken, that it doesn't work anymore. And so you are starting to see, the North Dakota Monitor or other news services come in who raise capital either through donations or other ways. Do you see that as a path forward for newspapers, like raising capital, raising donations? And if that is, do you run into a situation where maybe the press isn't as neutral as it needs to be if you're getting donations to stay alive?
I really don't, because
Okay.
you guys, Rob knows as well as I do that if you're a journalist, you're going to take the hit. If somebody tells you, I'm not going to give you any money unless you do X, Y, or Z, you're going to say, well, thank you very much, and no, thank you.
You would hope.
So I don't see us bending our ethics in that regard. So that's a tough road to hoe. The problem with a nonprofit model for journalism is that in a state like North Dakota, in these smaller communities, like just take Crosby, for instance, there's 2,400 people in the county. Okay, we have a circulation of 2,000, which is excellent. Some of those people obviously don't still live there, but there's not enough people who care about Divide County news to completely replace advertising. However, if everyone who did live in the county subscribed to that newspaper, when you're talking about, whether you're talking about a donation or you're talking about subscription or membership, it's really the same thing. We just need to size it once people understand the value and why they should be willing to pay more than they're paying now.
I worked for a journalism nonprofit, and it was definitely right of center in their politics, but they were actually great. I mean, they let me do what I want. There wasn't, in fact, their only editorial directive was they didn't like horse race coverage. They didn't want coverage of this candidate and that candidate. They wanted policy. They were really focused on cover the policy debates, and that was really it. They might have been funded by the Koch brothers or something. I have no idea who their donors were. But I do worry a little bit about the nonprofit model, because I worry about whether the donors actually have a tie to the communities. And I do worry about an ideological agenda, long term, which it doesn't necessarily have to manifest itself in telling a reporter you have to write. Sometimes it can manifest itself in more subtle ways. I'm very suspicious of the nonprofit model, I guess, personally. But again, I mean, we need reporters. We need people there. And I think that's the hard part, because somebody who is covering a beat the right way is not going to make any one side happy all the time. You're going to make them happy some of the time, maybe. But I really think that's what we struggle with. How do we get the public back to saying, you need this? Because it kind of feels like telling people to eat their broccoli.
It does. Exactly. I fought that many times. Yeah. And it has to start with younger people. And 10 years ago, as a publisher of two newspapers, sitting in a rural area in North Dakota, I used to think I was competing with Facebook for eyeballs, and that was the problem, is that people were reading too much online to want to read the newspaper. Well, the light bulb went off about 4 years ago when I was exposed to the reading proficiency levels in North Dakota. The last time I checked, overall grades, it was 44% are reading at grade level. There are some schools in Western North Dakota where that number is as low as 29%. So it's a long play, but we have to be concerned about people not even liking or wanting to read. I mean, it's that fundamental. Aside from all of the other distractions and questions about who's paying and who isn't paying, and where the news is coming from and all of those things, if people don't like to read, newspapers don't have anything for them. And that spells disaster for our future workforce, our society, for understanding who to vote for, whether our rights are being taken away. And I mean, it's just that bedrock of an issue.
That is fascinating. I had not considered that at all. Despite the blowback I get sometimes when my adventures with vocabulary, and people accuse me of using too many big words, and I just kind of laugh it off. But
that's funny, Rob. People accuse you of using too many big words, and after every podcast, my wife tells me about how I use words incorrectly on this podcast. So we're a good balance for North Dakota.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to make it clear, my last question about paying, having donations. I think the North Dakota Monitor is doing incredible work in North Dakota, and I'm really excited about the work that they do. So I don't want people to think that was guided. And I would also say there's a lot of talk show hosts and other kind of media who are more than willing to change their opinion and have conversations based on who writes them a check. So I think that but those are commentators.
And, both the North Dakota Monitor and the North Dakota News Cooperative, which are, nonprofit, the News Cooperative was actually homegrown and an offshoot of NDNA. Those entities are providing their copy free of charge to local newspapers, which don't have the resources to cover state.
I have a problem when the North Dakota Monitor is out there asking for donors, saying we don't have a paywall. You can get your news from us and not have to pay for it. That I thought was inexcusable. I mean, I am very suspicious of their long-term plan is to maybe put for-profit journalism out of business in favor of that. So I'm not a fan at all.
So Cecile, do we currently have any daily newspapers in North Dakota that print on a daily basis? I understand the form and there's constant content. Like, it feels like there's more content going, but it's more digital. I used to think of traditionally there was 10 dailies back in the day. Are there any dailies left, and who prints the most? Can you just fill that gap for me?
The Minot Daily News actually prints the most issues
Okay.
And I believe that's 6 days a week. And I have my handy dandy little media guide here to confirm that. The other papers now we call them multi-day papers. The Bismarck Tribune also publishes 6 days a week. So,
really?
Yeah, hard copy. So they're definitely still out there. But yes, some of the other papers have gone to a 2-day a week or a 3-day a week model, but then they're putting up an online edition daily. And that's really just about trying to find that balance between and cost wise. And, if I start talking about printing plants and access to printing, that's a whole nother ball of wax, along with the challenges we have from the U.S. Postal Service, who likes to have a model that says we'll deliver your weekly paper within 2 to 9 days. I mean, that is almost...
It's no longer news at that point. It's olds.
I will tell you, just to illustrate how digital first I am, I struggle. I write 2 print columns a week on Wednesdays and then over the weekend. And my deadlines are Monday and Thursday, and writing 2 days ahead is a nightmare for me sometimes because I'm like, I don't know what's going to be. I'm so in the moment. I don't write that far ahead. And so that's a struggle for me, which probably people who are veterans of this industry laugh at that. But that was hard. But I fell in love with newspapers early. I was a paper boy starting at 10 years old. For 8 years, all the way through a senior in high school. I delivered the Minot Daily News, 7 days a week. And I used to every day after I would deliver the papers, I would come inside, I'd pour myself a big glass of orange juice because a lot of times I was sweaty and tired from carrying all those papers, especially on Wednesdays and Sundays when Wednesdays they always had inserts. And Osco Drug always did one that like the Minot Daily couldn't automatically insert. So I had to insert 100 Osco Drug and lug these things around the neighborhood.
Let it go, Port.
Yeah. Well, hey, I did a lot of work, but I drinking that big glass of orange juice and then reading the newspaper. It's how I kind of fell in love with like the columns and the opinion. I started with the cartoons, but then I started reading about Ross Perot and stuff at the time. I remember reading editorial cartoons about Ross Perot and how funny he looked. They made him look. And I don't know. I fell in love with newspapers at a young age, and they still delivered. I mean, they deliver something that is absolutely vital, and we have to support them when they're local, and it's just so important, and it's a tough job to convince people of that right now.
Well, and Rob, I would also just add, we hear a lot about healthcare deserts. We hear about childcare deserts. We hear about grocery store deserts. Cecile, this is the first time I've heard the term news deserts.
Oh, really?
And I think that's an important part when we're talking about communities. There's lots of different components, and this is one of them.
Yeah. The news desert in our industry is a growing term. It's one that is starting to rub a little the wrong way because there are newspapers. For instance, in North Dakota, there are 3 counties that don't have a resident newspaper, but that doesn't mean that they're completely without local coverage.
Sure.
There are neighboring newspapers who are trying to fill that gap. Some more successfully than others. But this whole survey process has really forced us to try to look, and I'm even starting to say more often, local news organization rather than local newspaper, because, it could be that in those places where there isn't a resident newspaper, that we need to look at a different model that doesn't involve print. Just one quick little thing I want to share. Somebody said in our survey, it feels like the newspapers are archiving our neighborhood's soul with every edition. And,
Good.
that just says so much about how much these newspapers mean in these communities across the state.
Well, that's another treasure trove. Have you ever done genealogy or you've tried to do research on a subject and you're going back and finding papers? Who do you think maintains all those archives and maintains that record of a community's history and growth and the good times and the bad times? It's your newspaper. And, even archiving it in a digital format is hard and expensive, and it's worth supporting.
Try to go back and find something that somebody posted on Facebook 5 years ago. Good luck.
I try sometimes. I take deep dives into people's social media history sometimes. And it's not very easy. Cecile, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Fantastic stuff. The article, the survey that we were talking about, you can read about it at News Co-op. It looks like newscoopnd.org. It's News Co-op, NEWSCOOPND.org. You can go there. They've got other great stories as well, but the story about this and support your local newspaper because it's important. Cecile, thanks.
Thanks for the opportunity.